I like that particular line because I love the concept of the first miracle of turning water into wine. My girls say that I do, however, carry it too far, and it's probably unnecessary to celebrate that event every night. Mark Twain once said, "When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. When I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much the old man had learned in just 7 years." I'm still waiting for my girls to draw the same conclusion. I always delight in the fact that my daughter Rebecca has joined the choir. Back in the late 60s, before I left for college and before the church came to its senses, I was in the choir. I don't recall it as being quite as glorious then as it is today. However, I do give credit to our choir leader who gave it her best shot. I was at a function not too long ago, and as I settled in, sipping a glass of wine, and not, I'm afraid, of a miracle vintage, I looked across the room, and there she was, Charlene Elliott. Charlene had been a mainstay in the life of Porpoise. Not only was she my 7th grade teacher, she was also the organist of this church, director of its choir, and head of its youth group. She lived with the Seavies in their home across from the store, allowing her life as a teacher to be far too close for comfort from her students. On cold winter days, we would always try and use whatever church or personal connections we could to convince her that she should bring us to school in her car, thus allowing us to avoid the long and cold wait for the bus. Rarely did we prevail, only in fact on those occasions when she would convince us that we should shovel out her car of a snowbank from an overnight storm. In the model of teachers of that day, she was firm but fair, caring, yet able to hold the respect afforded to such authority figure. We as children had never given any thought to her age, though we did wonder from time to time why in all of her years she had never married. Ours was a simple life then. We looked at things simply. We were the kids, she was the teacher. We were young, so therefore she must be old. Young people were in their teens, old people were in their 60s. We were the children of the 50s, and like our TV sets, life was black and white and not subject to a great deal of selection. But as I discreetly looked at her, I was instantly puzzled. Charlene was looking really good. In fact, she hadn't seemed to change a bit while I had grown heavy and gray. In my head, I began to do the math. As best I could figure, she had been my teacher around 1962. That's nearly 50 years ago. Had she been in her early or mid-60s, just like all organists, all organists are in their mid-60s, aren't they? Then that would make her approximately 115 years old. She looked really good for 115. In fact, what was really disturbing to me was how much better she looked than me. Well, after a little research, some clarity was added to my reflections of the past. Charlene had indeed been all that I had remembered, but come to find out, she hadn't achieved her position at the age of 60, but rather at the ripe old age of 22. Girls of the 50s somehow look older than the youth of today. In fact, I'll go one step further. I've seen some pictures of a lot of you, and I think you all look younger now than you did then. Who would have guessed it? Like I said, we were kids of the 50s, little beaver cleavers, and not greatly perceptive, obviously. Time and age were distant concepts. I celebrated, well, celebrate could be too strong a term, another birthday this year, which made me the same age as Pastor Ruth. 49. My daughter Stacy put together an amazing video to mark the occasion. It included photos from my childhood until today, all set to music. It was remarkable, really. It included greetings from friends near and far, and even President Bush sent video remarks. There was no way to get through it without feeling blessed. Blessed to be a husband and father, and thanks to Laura, a grandfather. to have the experiences we've had and the people in our lives that we've been fortunate enough to call friends, including all of our girls' friends. Blessed to have been able to live in this remarkable place. The older I get, the more I realize that youth is a very relative term. Imagine ever thinking that being 49 was old. Wisdom used to come from wise old sages, grandparents, perhaps even parents and the like. Now I find that much of my wisdom comes from the internet. I find what the internet lacks in content it more than makes up for in volume. Still, I found this explanation concerning age on the computer recently. It's said to have come from a late great sage, George Carlin. When we were young, we can't wait to grow older. We're so excited about the possibilities that lie ahead. We're not 6, we're 6.5. We're not 8, we're going on 9. We're not 16, we're almost 17. And then one exciting day, we become the magic 21. From then on, things change. You become 21, but then you turn 30. Before you know it, you're pushing 40. And if you're lucky, you reach 50. Finally, you make it to 60. By then, time begins to move faster. You hit 70, and then it's sort of day by day. You hit Wednesday. By the time you're 80, every day becomes a cycle. You hit lunch, you turn 4:30, you reach bedtime. And it doesn't end there. During the 90s, you start going backwards. I was just 92. Then strangely, if you're lucky enough to make it to 100, you become a little kid again. I'm 100.5, you'll say. Or maybe even 105, like Monica's friend who was with us not long ago. May we all be so lucky. Oddly enough, it's those years that we're trying to hurry along when we're young that we seem to cherish the most as we slow down later on. Seth Pinkham used to laugh and tell me of the days he was brought in his first long pair of pants. He had been born and brought up at the head of the harbor in Cape Porpoise. Those large gray buildings are still there just down the street. His family had opened a general store there in the late 1860s, and they were a greatly respected local family. According to the custom of the day, all young children wore skirts, and Seth said that he was in one on the morning that he spotted a ladder lying against the old store building. He couldn't resist the temptation, so up he started. He climbed and got up to the first set of rungs, and his father caught him just in time before he went higher. If the boy is going to start climbing, then it's time that he had his first pair of pants, he had told his wife. Thus, Mrs. Pinkham took Seth in hand, boarded the trolley, and headed for Biddeford to do some shopping. He could remember that event as clearly in his mid-70s as he did that day at the age of 4. At the time, he told me, which is really no different than today, I couldn't remember what I had for breakfast. Last year, our family friend Lyman Huff became ill. I called the ambulance, and Shirley and I remained with him as he was taken through a series of tests before his hospital admittance. He was 85 years old at the time and not used to being away from home. As he looked around the sterile room filled with electronic monitors, his mind drifted back. It sure is different than the last time I was in the hospital, he said. When was that? I replied, grateful for some distracting conversation and expecting some vague recollection. July 14th, 1932, he said matter-of-factly. I was playing baseball in the Cape and slid into home plate. I managed to cut up my leg and it got infected. It had people worried for a while. I hadn't recovered from his first comment. You can remember the date you were admitted, I asked incredulously. Oh yes, he assured me, thinking clearly that it was no big deal. And then he continued, but it worked out okay. Nurse Smaldone took really good care of me. I looked at him in disbelief. You remember the name of your nurse? Yes, from 1932. Sure, I calculated quickly. That was 71 years ago. And you can really remember the name of the person who treated you. Lyman shrugged. As the months passed, this bit of information turned out to be only the tip of an iceberg of local knowledge. He talked of sliding on winter nights from the top of Crow Hill to the head of the cove in his 8-man toboggan. Very grateful for the particularly heavy lady from the church choir who sat in the front in order to give him extra momentum. He talked of skating parties at the mill pond and baseball games at the townhouse, and of riding in the wagon with his grandfather to pick up bags from vacationers at the port in order to deliver them to the Langsford house. He talked of Christmas gatherings held in this sanctuary and of the presents handed out by a disguised fisherman dressed as Santa to all the appreciative and awestruck children. He talked of the teenage challenge of trying to ring the church bell at midnight on the 4th of July and how the church elders had hired old Mr. Wiles to guard the bell at all cost. When various distractions designed to lure Mr. Wiles away from his post didn't work, the boys decided to climb up on the roof, into the steeple, and rig a rope of their own. They were engaged in the process in the back of the building when the old gentleman couldn't resist his own childhood experience. At midnight, he called out, "Come on in and ring the bell, boys, because if you don't ring it, then I'll have to ring it for you." The light in Lyman's eyes was so bright and the recollection such a happy one, I couldn't help but wonder why he hadn't set foot in the church for the past half-century. Change, I concluded. Simple change. For as many stories as he told, none of them were happenings or events that were after the war. His mind was stuck in his youth, thinking of those happy and carefree days, taking comfort in the memory of simpler times. To a lesser extent, the same was true of Seth. He had loved his hometown and the family that had nurtured him, but there had also been tragedy. Shifting cargo as he had come down Crow Hill had startled his father's horses. Mr. Pinkham had been dragged from his seat, and by the time the horses could be stopped in the square, it was too late. His father was dead, and his mother's life and his would forever change. Still, he found love and happiness and knew that he had much to be grateful for. He was a regular in this church. In the crossing of generations, Seth and Lyman were adults during those happy days that I remember from childhood. Every day we would play baseball in the tiny diamond in the Pinkham yard across the street from the Huffs at the head of the cove. Home plate was in the front of a large rock at the top of the field. From his picture window, overlooking us, Seth would watch every game, never seeming to mind the ruts we were digging into his lawn. A smile and a wave would always acknowledge us, or a congratulatory thumbs up if we made a particularly good play. Across the harbor, Lyman would be hard at work at his fish house, no doubt thinking of the many games that he had played on similar fields, probably worrying about our slides in the home plate. When Lyman was really ill, he began seeing all of his family and friends. They were there at the hospital to greet him. His father and his mother, his grandfather Perry, his whole fifth grade class. I don't think he was in a tunnel of light, but I do know that he was in a tunnel of love. That's sort of what it's like when a native or a longtime member of the church on the Cape walks down this center aisle. We see, so many friends and families from the past. Harrison Seavey is still there by Patty and Morris. Louise Fairfield is over there with Jimmy and Joe. The Pinkhams are here by the aisle. The Wedlocks are in the back. There's Carl and Keith and Alter and Ruth and so many more. The memories of what was blend beautifully with what is, as the life of the church moves ever onward. I wish that those of you who weren't here could have known the town as it was then. I wish you could have known its people, that you could have experienced the simplicity of small-town Maine. I wish you could have seen the love that was a part of this church, even when times got tough. But then again, I wish they could have met you, that they could have come to understand that, yes, things could and would change, but that through it all, much of what they loved would be made even stronger. I wish that they could have seen the size and strength of this congregation, that they could have seen the improvements made to the building and the ways in which their own families were remembered and honored. I wish that they could have felt the outreach and the caring. If only they were here to understand that faith and good defies the ages and knows no single generation. Life unfolds to one, even as it closes for another. As we all look back to our simpler days, a new generation sits on the floor over here each Sunday, and one day they will be telling their grandchildren of the wonderful days spent in this sanctuary, how warm the people were then, how they wished that their children could have met them, how they had held fundraisers for worthy causes, visited the lighthouse, and even learned so many lessons from a penguin. and their grandchildren will all look at them like they're daft. Maybe by then we will have learned the second part of the internet message concerning age and numbers, which seems to me to be an appropriate message for fathers on this special day. That is, never mind your age, and never look back with sadness. Take from the past that which is good. Hold on to the memories, but live for today. Find joy in your children and grandchildren and the people and events that surround you. Open your eyes to the blessings you receive every day and share your gifts with others. Throw out the non-essential numbers. This includes age, weight, and height. Let the doctors worry about that. That's why you pay them. Keep only cheerful friends. The grouches bring you down. Keep learning. Learn more about the computer, crafts, gardening, whatever. Never let the brain go idle. Enjoy the simple things. Laugh often, long, and loud. The tears happen. Endure, grieve, and move on. The only person who is with us our entire life is ourselves. Be alive while you are alive. Surround yourself with that which you love, whether it's family, pets, keepsakes, plants, music, hobbies, whatever. It's your home. Make it your refuge. Cherish your health. If it's good, preserve it. If it's unstable, improve it. If it's beyond what you can improve, get help. Tell the people you love that you love them at every opportunity. And on those days when it seems just too hard to hold on to these ideas, then try and remember the mayonnaise jar and the bottle of wine. What's that, you say? A professor stood before his philosophy class and had some items in front of him. When the class began, wordlessly, he picked up a very large and empty mayonnaise jar and proceeded to fill it with golf balls. He then asked the students if the jar was full. They all agreed that it was. So the professor then picked up a box of pebbles and poured them into the jar. He shook the jar lightly. The pebbles rolled into the open areas between the golf balls. He then asked the students again if the jar was full. They agreed that it was. The professor then picked up a box of sand and poured it into the jar. Of course, the sand filled up everything else. He asked once more if the jar was full. The students responded with a unanimous yes. The professor then picked up a bottle of wine from under the table and poured the entire contents into the jar, effectively filling the empty space between the sand. The students laughed. Now, said the professor, as the laughter subsided, I want you to recognize that this jar represents your life. The golf balls are all the important things, your family, your children, your health, your friends, and your favorite passions. Things that if everything else was lost and only they remained, your life would still be full. The pebbles are the other things that matter, like your job, your house, your car. The sand is everything else, the small stuff. If you put the sand into the jar first, he continued, there is no room for the golf balls. The same goes for life. If you spend all of your time and energy on the small stuff, you will never have room for the things that are really important. Pay attention to the things that are critical to your happiness. Play with your children, take your partner out to dinner, play another 18, attend every service at the church in the Cape. There will always be time to clean the garage or fix the disposal. Take care of the golf balls first, the things that really matter. Set your priorities. The rest is just sand. One of the students raised her hand and inquired about the wine and what it represented. The professor smiled. I'm glad you asked. It's somewhat of a miracle. It just goes to show you that no matter how full your life may seem, there's always time for another glass of wine.